All right, as our government prepares then for the upcoming G20 Summit, we talk to representatives of civil society in a panel discussion with Sabelo Chalufu, the director of Better Governance Initiative, as well as Caroline Peters, the founder of Callas Foundation, for their perspective. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time. The ongoing legal dispute, I want to start there, between ASERI and the city of Johannesburg over the forced removals of the informal traders, it does highlight deep questions about just inclusion and justice. Sabelo, what do you think the role of civil society practically, bridging the gap between policy ambition and public experience is in this particular moment?
Good evening, Unati, Caroline, and your viewers. Thanks so much for having us. So for us as the Better Governance Initiative, this is precisely the kind of reason that we exist. We've formulated this organization because, oftentimes, government is going around, trying to implement policy and the like, and very often what we have observed and seen is that members of the public and affected stakeholders often get left behind. These are people who are not in formal structures and the like. Other organizations, typically are represented. Other sectors of society typically are represented. Your labor, your business, and the like. And so what we exist for is to help residents particularly play their part in these kinds of things. And so when you look at something such as the situation now in the city of Joburg, and I definitely am not going to get into that in detail in any way, but you would have had a scenario where the city would have several years ago, I would assume at this point, engaged in a process to put together a policy and then now be in the process of implementing it. And what you are seeing happening between now them and the traders is there is a disjuncture, between what the city is attempting to achieve and how that affects the stakeholders who are the traders in this instance. And so for us, what we would naturally encourage is a proper conversation outside of court to resolve the issues, because the traders do have some rights that they are interested in. There are things that they are working towards, specifically to provide food for themselves, sustenance and the like. And the city has a responsibility to regulate, including in such a way as to ensure its regulations assist the traders. And so for us, these are the kinds of things we are passionate about and want to see better improved upon from both sides, in fact.
Yeah, Sabelo, I mean, what I think you're raising also there is that, disjuncture or overlap between policy and lived experience. And Caroline, I want to just also frame the same question this way, though. The dispute around these forced removals of these informal traders in the city of Johannesburg is also being linked to cleanup efforts ahead of the G20 Summit, as we've been hearing. I mean, what does this then reveal about how authorities, as in government, often treat informal economies? And how should then civil society respond when livelihoods, especially, are sacrificed for what most people call optics?
Good evening, Unati and Sabelo, and good evening to the viewers. Thank you for that. So I want to say that, so as we approach the G20 Summit, my hope has always been that the voices of ordinary South Africans and the poor are heard as clearly and as those of global leaders. And we see this with the G20. And I mean, this is that the talk on the street is that the city is being cleaned up. If we speak about development, so for us as civil society, we are the heartbeat of democracy. It connects the government. We connect government promises to the people's lived realities. Civil society is not just an add-on to democracy. It is the public conscience that ensures policies translate into action. And I want to also highlight exactly what Sabelo said earlier. about we are aware that the city has a mandate to police the bylaws of the city, but we also know people's lived realities is that unemployment is high, etc. So we exist as civil society because people trust community structures more than bureaucracy. We want to bridge the gap between the rights on paper and the dignity in practice.
Yeah. And Sabelo, let's talk then about, that engagement practically. I mean, the Better Governance Initiative, you speak of informed, engaged citizens as key to democracy. How do you then see citizen engagement transforming governance, especially when trust between the public and government institutions is eroding? I mean, we see this too on the various commissions that have been established investigating corruption in the country.
Thank you for that. And this is a very important issue, And fortunately, I happen to actually have a working knowledge of even the policy that's currently in dispute between the traders and the city. And one of the things that policy specifically provides for is a stakeholder engagement forum, between the city and the traders. Specifically for instances such as now, to say, let us, the city on the one side, the informal traders on the other side, come together and practicalize then, how does the city implement its policy, and how do we, the informal traders, how do they find expression in that, and how are their needs taken care of in such a way that the city achieves its objectives and the informal traders are not harmed, or at least harm is minimized to them. And this is the kind of thing that we see pretty much oftentimes across the board in different sectors of society and in different clusters of governance, that too often government approaches issues from a perspective that, we have this policy and we're going ahead and implementing, oftentimes to be blunt, come hell or high water. And this naturally then creates a tension between the two. And this is also why you see, and other research and studies are continuing to show, that you continuously then have a higher level of trust to civil society, the public, as against government and political leadership. And this is then where, as Caroline puts it so eloquently, that civil society then can assist in facilitating these kinds of things, in facilitating a harmony between the two. Because at the end of the day, government doesn't exist for itself. It exists to serve us. The political parties have promised us particular things. They are now in government. They must now implement these for our benefit. And where then there is a disjuncture, civil society then comes into the fore to say, well, here is how we can bring the two together. In our situation, for instance, as the Better Governance Initiative, this is one of the things that we had that we prioritized specifically, and we have demonstrable experience here, and I can practicalize using the example of the draft regulations to the NCA, the National Credit Act. There had been a situation where government was proposing these, and there was a public participation process, but many residents, ordinary residents, you and I, were not familiar with it. And when we took it upon ourselves to say, let's bring it to people's attention and let's flag what the issues are to the extent that there are any difficulties, and implore on government, persuade government to take a different position. Fortunately, by the end of it all, government did listen, and the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition withdrew that. And so this is where then you get to see a situation of there being an issue that arises, a civil society response to it, the public coming on board and understanding the issues and exercising their rights because they are now informed. Yeah. And once we close that loop, we then can get to a position where we can better create the kind of society that we want. And so we, for instance, from the BGI's perspective, would encourage this kind of collaboration And at times, yes, it can be antagonistic, but ultimately, at least from the perspective of ourselves as BGI, I believe even many other organizations, ultimately the aim here is to ensure that we create the kind of better and more just society that we all want.
And I mean, Sabelo, listening to you, one does kind of get excited because you see some traction. But Caroline, I mean, whilst there is some traction, corruption still continues to just erode social trust. It limits development, also making people very frustrated. I mean, from your respective vantage point, when you look at advocacy and community work, how do we move from naming corruption to rebuilding some of these systems of integrity, that citizens, South Africans, can start to believe in?
So for me, corruption is more than the theft of money, Unati. It's the theft of hope, of trust, the theft of the future. Corruption diverts funds meant for food. I mean, we see it with food insecurity, something that's high on the agenda with this year with G20. We see it in housing. We see it in the safety, in the violence in community. So the very issues that community organizations that we fight to resolve daily. This is what so corruption is. It weakens the donor confidence. It strangles small NPOs and forces us to fill the gaps left by the failed systems. Civil society must lead by example through transparency. We have community oversight and accountability. Accountability begins with us. We see our whistleblowers and activists face intimidation daily. I mean, I currently in court versus the Minister of Justice. Again, systems. So we must protect them or us as defenders of the public integrity. We see a culture of ethical leadership and active citizenry is the only antidote to corruption. When corruption wins, communities lose out. It steals bread from the hungry, literally, and dignity from the poor.
And that's so devastating to hear. I'm going to wrap with this question, and it's a question I'm going to ask you both. I mean, Sabelo, let's perhaps start with you as we wrap up our conversation. When we talk about accountability in this country, I mean, we often mean holding people or holding power to account. But how do we also hold ourselves as civil society accountable for the impact and the integrity of our own work, particularly when you look at the work that has been done in as far as corruption is concerned?
Yeah, far too often we speak about accountability, and sometimes you get a sense that it is an abstract concept, but really this is the kind of issue that we can ourselves, and as Caroline puts it, to say we need to begin with us, to say what is it that we ourselves have promised to do? What is it that we ourselves are responsible for? And that which we are responsible for, are we indeed handling it properly? Are we indeed transparent ourselves? And so for me, when we then look at that as an organization, we say to ourselves, well, we then need to demonstrate this from our own perspective. We then need to be the ones who say, you know what, we, for instance, as the BGI are a new organization. Here's who we are. Here's what we believe in. Here's our policies. Hold us against these. Here are our promises to you, residents and the rest of society. Hold us against these. And that means, for instance, that when the year comes around and we have, as we currently have in our policies, we have committed that our books will be open. We will make these open. We do that. If the financial year is passed and we haven't done that, we ought to be held accountable for that. And naturally, that would encourage even us ourselves to say we ought to behave properly. And this is the kind of thing that I'm well aware many organizations take very seriously as well, are transparent about.
Yeah.
And including then in other instances where there may be some malfeasance and the like. And I would think that it is important then for members of the public to flag issues that they are aware of in civil society, because there are naturally, there will always be some bad apples somewhere.
Yeah.
And unless we shine the light on these issues, we will never be able to resolve them. But even us as civil society need to be
absolutely, Sabelo, as difficult as that is. Caroline, you've got very little time left because Sabelo stole most of your time. But I want to ask that same question to you, but particularly if you can keep to time. I mean, it is important that the voices of civil society continue post the summit, correct?
Yes, definitely. I want to say that civil society cannot demand, we cannot demand accountabilities from others if we're not accountable ourselves, So we must model the values that we fight for: transparency, inclusivity, honesty, and service. It means we must begin to be open about how we use donor or public funds. We must ensure our work truly serves communities, not our own egos or personal agendas. We must practice ethical leadership and avoid the power imbalances that we often criticize in government. If civil society becomes self-serving, we stop being civil and we stop serving society. Thank you, Nati.
Thank you so much to you both. Really do appreciate it. Sabelo Chalufu, the Director of Better Governance Initiative, as well as Caroline Peters, the founder of Callas Foundation, for their perspective on civil society, especially as we start to talk about the G20.